Shelo, Shin Lamed Aleph. We'll begin we're going to start today's class from Perik Ches, chapter 8. Some deep stuff we did yesterday. So let's just, a quick review, not too long. We've been doing a lot of reviews. I'm hoping you guys are internalizing this stuff. This is a very deep mimer. But the last thing we said was essentially Hashem created the infinite light, or he revealed, I should say. It's not really, the word created does not really apply to that. He revealed the infinite light before he created the worlds, even though this then posed kind of a strange impasse for him, because the infinite light was incompatible with the worlds that he intended to create. And the only reason he revealed the infinite light to begin with was because he was interested in creating worlds. Because we said that Hashem didn't just have to reveal infinite light because he's infinite. He's not like the sun, we gave the analogy, where the sun is like, does not have free choice whether or not to shine its rays, right? And to sort of reveal its light. God, on the other hand, does. He didn't have to reveal everything that comes out of him. And so the fact that he decided to reveal infinite light was only for one reason, was because it was towards the kavanah of creation. But then we wound up saying that, on the contrary, it seems like it was an impediment to creation, because infinite light merely has to be removed before you even can start with creation. So he revealed the infinite light, only now having to put it away so that he could create the worlds. And we said, why did he do that? I brought this question up with like a chassid on the phone yesterday, and he almost started crying from like joy and laughter. He's like, we think about that worrying so every day, in and out, all day long. All we do is always like, it's such a simple question, such a good question. Like, how come we never thought of it? And so he says, so what's the answer? Because having created the infinite light and then drawn the klal harishon, the first principal klal, which was basically when it went up in Hashem's mind before the tzimtzum, that he wanted to create the worlds, because that happened inside of an infinite light. Therefore, even if he removes the infinite light, and even after he makes many, many contractions, and even after we come to such finite reality such as this, where everything seems for sure 100% separate from everything else, because the klal came out of the infinite light, it really does still contain the sort of hechsher, he called it, and the preparation and the readiness to be able to tap back into its original source before the tzimtzum. And this, and only this, would actually allow Hashem to reach his goal and destiny and interest, kavana, which is to make a true dira b'tachtoni, which means the dira means Hashem and all of his greatness, his infiniteness, should nonetheless be able to dwell in the tachtonim, the lowest places. If the lowest places didn't originate inside of such an infinite place, they would never be able to bring that out of themselves. So we said yesterday. And therefore, there would have been, if, for example, just one more point of review and then we'll go forward, one might say, well, Hashem could have still created the world with a drop of light, in other words, a klal, and even after the pratim came out of that klal, all the pratim would still have a feeling and a taste for the klal that they came from, right? And that klal is a state of oneness, right? And therefore, even after the 10 statements came out of the first statement, right, the klal, they would still be able to harness and feel and possess that state of oneness from the klal. And therefore, there could still be an aspect of bittul and a oneness inside of the creation, even if they didn't start from infinity, even if they started from a first klal. Who can remind us where that was not ultimately sufficient? It's a deep question. That's why I said it's a deep mimer. But this was the topic of yesterday's class. And I'll ask it one more time. Okay, Noam, you got it? I think you said the same thing yesterday as an answer to a different question, and you're right both times. Right? So maybe it was the same question. So exactly. So the idea is, if we were created from a klal, which means just a drop, and not that the drop came out of infinity, yes, we would have experienced the oneness of creation that was ultimately started in that drop. But the problem is what? Inside of that drop, the drop is a dedicated aspect of godliness for the worlds. In other words, why does Hashem have himself in a drop? Because he wanted all the worlds to be in an original klal, which means that original klal is still ultimately for and has the worlds in it in mind. And therefore, even if we would come to a state of bittul, of oneness, back to that original klal, it's not a oneness that would completely undo our feeling of self, because even in that klal, it was dedicated and initiated for us. So while it's busy thinking of us and it's this level of godliness which is essentially having us in mind and therefore necessitating our existence, we can't then arrive at that klal and undo our existence. If the source which is enlivening us is basically maintaining the feeling of self at some level, then no matter how bittul we're going to get, we're not going to actually ever get out of ourself. And therefore the drop had to come from a state of true infinity. Because when we finally get back to that original klal, we can also get back to the inside of that original klal, i.e. the whole ocean of light from which it was drawn, which is also in a very deep concealed way, one and the same as that klal. So in this way, we can reach what's called a bittul b'metzias. Noam pretty much said it in one word. I'm a little verbose. But yes, with this, we can reach it. We can now reach a level of total self-negation, because we're reaching a place where when we get there, it doesn't have us in mind and we don't exist there. And yet we can channel that place and it can be streaming through our existence, an aspect which is completely beyond our existence. And hence you have what's called a dira b'tachtonim. That's really what Hashem wants. And that's why this whole process was necessary to be made just like this. Okay, so this is yesterday's class. Let's move on to chapter 8. And we're not out of the woods, but I think we will finish before Shavuos with any luck. Ches, u'ba'omek yoser yesh lomar. A little bit deeper, if you can handle it, there is to say, Dali de avoda ba'pratim. Now through the avoda that we're going to do at the level of the pratim. In other words, now he did all this, he made the orient, so he made the klal, he made klal after klal after klal. Here we are sitting here, YTD, right? And we're going to start doing the avoda in our state of total separateness with what we call the pratim, with the details of creation. And what he's saying now is through this, magim lebechinas etzam ha'or, right? Buckle your seatbelts, it goes one step higher. By working with the pratim, we can reach to a state which is called the etzam ha'or. We're introducing a new term here, the essence of the light, which is even higher than all the light we've been discussing up until now. What was the highest peak of light that we discussed right now? When Hashem revealed the Or Ein Sof, right? And then inside of that ocean of light, he found a drop, etc. We're talking about the ocean of light is the highest as we got. He's now saying that when you deal with the details of this world and do the avodah of trying to make a dir b'tachtonim, you can reach higher than the Or Ein Sof. You can reach to what's called the essence of that Or, which is essentially that light as it is inside of Hashem before he revealed it. It's like the rays of the sun before they came out, which is a higher state of revelation than anything which comes into a state of Gilui, state of revelation. Yeah, Noam.
What's the first word? It seems like a good connecting word. No.
Uva omek means in deep, deeper. Yoser, where omek is deep, yoser is deeper. Okay, so how is that we're suddenly going to, in other words, let's just point this out. When Hashem revealed light, he revealed the infinite light, and then there was, let's say, infinite stages of klal and prat. None of those stages of klal and prat had any business with anything above the Or Ein Sof. We just made a big chiddush. They could even go beyond their original klal, which was a kind of an exciting move, that they can go beyond their own source and go into the Or Ein Sof. But nowhere do we say that they can then go beyond the Or Ein Sof. So what we're saying now is only when you get down to the bottom of the story, in the details of our world, is there now an ability to reach to the Etzem Ha'or, which is above the light, which is above the worlds. Sheyeshno behelem ba'klal de'olamos. That infinite light, which we said was sort of hiding in weight inside of the original klal, because the whole ocean is in some sense in that drop, we're going even beyond that ocean. Demash yesh behelem ba'klal. Because what is concealed inside of that original klal, that first aliyas haratzon that Hashem decided to sort of isolate and designate inside of the infinite ocean, and then when he all of a sudden makes the tzimtzum, what goes into that original klal of the Olamos, hu b'chinas hispashtus ha'or. Right? We said it's kind of an amazing thing happens. The infinite ocean goes into a finite drop. We spoke yesterday about this idea of a mathematical point, right? And the notion that it's a mathematical point as opposed to a point on a piece of paper is because it has zero expansion. Any point you're going to draw or even really imagine in a certain sense in this world, you can measure it to some level. When we talk about the point, which we called yesterday the Rashima, right, the imprint of the light that was left over from when the Or Ein Sof contracted itself, it left something sort of like so minuscule as to basically not take up any shape. And that's called like sort of the point of the top tip of the Yud. Inside of that, because it's shapeless, because it's formless, it can somehow harness inside of it all the infinite ocean of light. And that's why when you climb back up to the original cloud and you go really deep into that cloud, you can even find infinity there. But all of that infinite ocean of light was only a certain level of the Or Ein Sof. It was what we call the hispashtus of the Or. The hispashtus of the Or means the Or, as Hashem already decides to, so to speak, let it out and reveal it, to shine it. So all that infinite light, which is an insane thing to even think about, yes, it is found hidden inside of that cloud, but only that light is found inside of that cloud. In other words, the light which precedes that hispashtus, which is what we're calling the etzem ha'or, which is that same hispashtus or, but when it was inside of the etzem, that level of light, the klal harishon never had its dirty hands on it, did it? Right? Because the only time the original klal sort of emerged was in an arena called the hispashtus, the expansion of the light. So that was the light which was available to fit into the cloud. But the essence of the light, which is before it even came out, there was no klal rishon at that stage. So therefore, that light didn't make it into the cloud. But can you get to it? Yes, but only when you get to the prati. So this is really this is why creation was, so to speak, necessary, and why we here can accomplish things that even the Or Ein Sof cannot accomplish. Because only from the working with the details of the pratim can you reach to a point which is not only beyond creation, but is beyond the infinite light which preceded creation. Demashesh behelim ba'klal, 3 lines down, I'll just read this again. That which is concealed inside of the cloud of the worlds is only the expansion of the light, the hispashtus of the Or. Shebetechila haya Or Ein Sof memalias makam hachalal. Because we said that light, which is the ocean, it was all one and mixed in with the drop of the ocean. They were inseparable, and therefore the drop sort of has the ocean inside of it. But that light, albeit infinite, it's not the ultimate level of light, because it's already light as it sort of shines, as it comes out. And then afterwards, after it shined and came out in that very light, yes, it went up in his will to make all the worlds, Atzilus, Bria, etc. But where did that whole Aliyas Haratzon take place? Again, in the hispashtus of the light. Therefore, any connection for this will of the worlds, which is the klal of the worlds in its ultimate source, the first klal, any connection with the origin of the worlds, with the infinite light, which is beyond worlds, it's only with the light which is in a state of expression. Whereas, when it all plays out and we find ourselves in this finite place and we start to work with the details, we can even reach to the essence of the light, which again is what? The light inside of the essence before it shines. Just like we said a minute ago, that the ocean and the drop at some level are synonymous, right? Which is before the drop is extracted from the ocean. There's no difference between the drop and the ocean, which is why the ocean is ultimately inside the drop. Take that same idea and go with the infinite light. When the infinite light is inside of the Atzmus, when we call it the Etzem Ha'or, it's because we're not exactly sure what's going on there. It's really Atzmus. And this is a very, very important little state of the game, because Atzmus and Or usually are opposites. Just like infinite and finite, like the infinite light and the klal rishon, they're usually opposites. The idea that the klal rishon sits inside of the ocean and at some level they become one and united, this is mamash a miracle. That's the reason why we can reach the infinite light when we're in the finite world. But if you take this one step higher, which we're trying to do, even the infinite light, when it's inside of the atzmus, that's very similar to the drop inside of the ocean, except it's the ocean inside of the essence. And the idea there is usually the revelation of light and the atzmus are opposite. Why? Because the essence of Hashem cannot be seen. And light is defined by revelation. And therefore, when the revelation comes out of the atzmus, we generally tend to say it's a huge step down, right? And because he took that step down, that's why it's relevant to make a drop out of it and create worlds from there, because from the Hashem's essence itself, he's in a too sort of high state to actually even have a thought of the worlds. First, he has to reveal the Or Ein Sof out of himself in a state of expression. Now that there's been sort of this dumbing down of the Atzmus to go into a state of infinite light, there it's relevant to make the Klal Rishon for the world. But inside of the Atzmus, it's too primordial to even for Hashem to even think of the world. And because light in general is in contrast with the Atzmus. Because it's either essence, which means it can't be seen, or it's light, which means it's not essence, it can be seen. So when you talk about this idea of the Etzem Ha'or, you're saying something kind of basically messianic in its ultimate essence. Because what you're saying is, there's a level where Hashem can do anything. And therefore, even though light in general is a sign that you're not getting the essence, because the essence is inexpressible, but there's a type of light whose function is to actually express the essence. It doesn't sort of take a step down and leave the essence in order to reveal a ray of the essence. It's an actual, he's galus of the Atzmus itself. And that's why we call it Etzem Ha'or. Because in a certain sense, what is it? Is it Or is it Etzem? Right? It's really the Atzmus, but it's the Atzmus's ability to actually show itself as Atzmus, not as, so to speak, a step down and just merely show an infinite ocean of light. And therefore, that is called Giloi Ha'atzmus. That's the real Dira B'Tachtoni. Because when Hashem says, I want a Dira, I want to live in this world, the general concept of why we call it a Dira is because in a Dira, like a flat, someone's apartment, they live with their whole self. When you're going to go to YTD and you have to put on a nice shirt, someone's going to say something to you if you don't wear your shoes around here, right? But if you're going to go even to anywhere you're going to go, which is not home, there's going to be some limitation. The idea of why it's called the Dira B'Tachtoni, Hashem's home, is because he is fully expressed there. There's not anything missing, which means it's his actual Atzmus, right? This is what he wanted to put into this world. And as it turns out, it's the only place that it can go. Because everything else in all the other worlds, they didn't have access to the Etzem Ha'or. It's only when you get to the bottom of the barrel and you're dealing with the Pratim, which we're going to explain why that is in a minute, can you actually reach beyond the original cloud, reach beyond the original ocean, and go right into the Atzmus and get to the Etzem Ha'or, and you can also channel this. Now you can properly make a Dira B'Tachtoni. All the talk of Dira B'Tachtoni we set up until now was just in order to understand this final stage. That was a long speech. L'chaim.
Are we calling that all nevertheless?
It's Etzem Ha'or. It's almost like a contradiction in terms. It's trying to define to you that there's a new sheriff in town. It's not the same Or that you once thought, because Or usually comes with a connotation of a step down, a ray, a mere ray. Etzem Ha'or is coming to tell you no. It's the actual Hisgalus of the Atzmus.
Which is basically the prat.
No, it comes out and can be found by working through the pratim, which is why basically Hashem created the world.
In this analogy of the prat being the point, which is
the point is the klal, right?
Right, but that cloud is the prat of the Or Ein Sof.
Okay, but it's not. There's many klal and prat. But what we're saying is only when you get to the final pratim, the actual 10 statements of creation, and as they're delineated in you and him and me, that's where, by working in the pratim, mamish, getting away from the klal and going into like the mud, that's when you can actually have access to the Etzem Ha'or.
So what I'm asking is that basically the result of this aspect of prat or cloud, which is synonymous with the point, which negates the expression. It goes into a place where there almost isn't anything else. There's nothing basically, which returns to this essence, because the point is like in Sof. It's
When you say point, though,
yeah, the point.
you mean the prat, because that's not the same thing in what we're.
So we're
The
saying
point
the
is like the klal. And so we're saying, no, the klal is not going to get you to the etzema or. As we just got through saying, the klal finds its highest expression in the Or Ein Sof in a state of hispashtus. That's as high as as can be contained inside the klal. Somehow, when this klal will open up its literal details into everything.
That's the point.
No, the pratim, you're calling it point, but you're just confusing your terms. Let's not call that point. We have a point means klal. This is pratim, which means all the infinite details that come out of that point. I can see why you could call it, but don't call it a point, right? It's just going to confuse us. It's like the points that come after the real point, which is the tiny little details. There, for some reason, as we're going to soon explain, is the only way to get to the etzem ha'or. All right, let's go on. Is everyone more or less following along here? David, following? I'll be honest with you, that couch is not helping you out. No, you got to find a seat at the table, man. Okay.
Torah is part of like the etzema or that's already the light, or is that already like the giving of the Torah? Is that connected to that? That light that's directly part of the essence, or is it a drop down?
The Torah itself?
Yeah.
Well, the Torah itself, you understand, has different states of expression. That's what we're trying to say. The Torah itself has klal and prat and klal and prat and klal. So in other words, it has the original klal,
Right.
the aleph of Anochi, and it also has all the final statements of this mimer. So in other words, it sort of scans the whole thing.
Right. But its initial drop is from not that kind of, as you were saying, like kind of like step down. Of the drop.
So the initial giving of the Torah was merely a klal, which means that unless we would then do something on our own initiative with the Torah, in other words, find chidushim, mine out the details from that klal, we will not be able to get the essence of the or merely from the Torah itself as it was given to us. That's the whole point. It requires a dira b'tachtonim means we have to do something in the tachtonim to make that dira. So since Hashem gave us the Torah from above, it's in and of itself. It's only the blueprints to enable us to find that etzema or. But Hashem partnered with us, and if we don't pull out the details and work with the details, it's only going to get us to the klal. And the klal only has access to the Or Ein Sof in a state of hispashtus. There's no access to the etzema or unless you mine out the pratim. And this has to do with also our lives, right? We're holding by day 43 over here, guys. The pratim are flying fast and furious. This is what this is about. Like, you're not going to get there with Pesach. You got to get there with the grueling avoda of midah after midah after midah in yourself, right? This is how you find the true you. Yeah. In other words, it's like looking into the finer details. When you see something in a broad spectrum, you have chesed and you have gevura, and they clash. And you have and inside of ourselves, we have, there's this whole psychology now, they call it parts. Your parts of yourself are clashing. Your 8-year-old and your 13-year-old are just not getting along with each other, right? And so this is only if you look at them in broad strokes. But if you start to break them down and break them down and break them down and break them down, chesed sheba chesed, gevura sheba chesed, in each little thing, so you're going to realize with those pratim, working with the details, you can all of a sudden make a certain harmony and unity with them that was not available and not seen until you broke them down. So in the state of separation, you actually find the greatest state of achdus, right?
At the end, your essence is the same.
That's right.
That's kind of the point I was trying to make. When you're going in to break yourself down, it's sort of like it's to get to the state of not being, which is represented by that point. Even though that's the cloud of the Ein Sof, it ends up being its prat.
You're confusing me, man.
No.
If you keep going, I'm going to leave.
That's the point.
No, Rafi, I know you well enough to know that you're definitely saying something, mamash, with wisdom and discernment. I'm telling you, our terms are off, and it's confusing me. Okay, let's go on. We're going to go. So that's just kind of a preface to this next, to understand why are the pratim have this wondrous power, right? So let's look at it. Ha'inyan hu. The inyan is as follows. The shoresh haprat hu lamayla me'aklal. Simple as that. The root of the details are higher than the klal, than the point. right? Does that make sense? If the point, if the point is basically the source of all these details, right? When the teacher teaches you, what does he do? He tells you in a point, in a klal, and only then delineates it. So all the delineated pratim are actually coming from their source, which is the klal. Now we're saying no, the pratim precede the klal. It actually makes sense if you think about it, because what did we say before? Where did the teacher all of a sudden get that point from? Right? He went back into his inner recesses of his mind, and he gathered, I guess, all the pratim, and he made a point out of it, right? And so really, the prat comes from before the klal. It's just that the expression of the prat comes after the klal, but the origin of the pratim actually precedes the klal. And so therefore, we've already sort of answered our question. We're going to go a little bit deeper into it, but you can see why, therefore, them working with the pratim will launch you up to a state which is higher than the klal, because if you can get to the source of the prat, you've reached higher than the source, right, than the klal. And he gives an example. Kamo chochma ubina. Let's look at chochma and bina. Even though chochma is the klal from which all the details of bina are drawn out, obviously, right? It's like the lightning flash, and then you delineate all the parts. Nonetheless, from this itself, from here itself, we can already see that the root of bina is higher than chochma. Why? By looking into the details of bina, nisvasvim lefamim inyanim chadashim shelo hayu menekudas hachochma. He doesn't actually explain it. He just gives a point of instruction that we can learn from it. And he says like this: sometimes, not every time, but sometimes, the fact that it's even sometimes already proves the point. When you're going to start looking into the details of bina, right, which is the breakdown of the whole Gemara, you're going to start getting into and looking into the details, you're going to come up with chidushim that were not in the original point of chachma. In other words, you can read a mimer, and you can get all involved in the details of it, and all of a sudden you're going to find details in this mimer that were not presented to you in the original klal. It's called a chiddush, basically, right? How is that possible? If it's true that the klal was really the source of the pratim, then there would be no way for me to find new pratim that were not in the klal. Because where am I going to get them from? The klal is the root. But the fact that I can all of a sudden find very often, right, pratim and chidushim, that in other words, it's like this. When let's say Rabbi Pasternak comes to teach his class, and let's just say I did some preparation a few years ago. Just kidding, guys. I prepared. Let's say you come with a lesson plan, right? And basically, I bring out my lesson plan, and I've exhausted my lesson plan. Everything I wanted to say, I said. And here comes Rafi, and he's mamish challenges the lesson plan, and he starts to say, well, when you said this, did you mean this? And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, you know what? I didn't prepare to say that, but you just found something new and more than what the teacher wanted to say. How is it possible, if all you're doing is hearing details from what I planned for you to say, that you're going to find new things inside of those details? It must mean that the details preceded the original, right? That there's something higher than the source of the planned, and this is true for Hashem. When Hashem said, okay, I'm going to make the world, I have my lesson plan, here's the light of the world. The fact is, we can find chidushim in Torah that he never, especially since we're talking about Torah Chadash in the afternoon, that he never planned for it to come out in the world. They were mamish deep inside in a way they were never given to the world. Some Rabbi Akiva, some Rabbi Yoshua came along and found them. How did he do that if it wasn't that there was something higher than the original klal? Right? That he's basically finding something that preceded the lesson plan of Hashem. The same is true when it comes to speech. He's using just sort of the powers of the soul to try and explain this point. Similar thing, just like he said, chokhmah to bina. Now you can say dibur, speech, to bina, right? In meaning, when a person will essentially speak out his words, right? In other words, he'll come to class and actually express himself in words, you'll find that there's all kinds of details. In other words, forget about that Rafi comes and the students come in and find more details. How about the teacher himself? Even though he came with a lesson plan and he thought for, let's say, 20 minutes about all the little things he was going to say point after point, when he actually winds up saying it, which means what? He takes it into a state of many, many, many more details. What I can think in 10 minutes, it would take me an hour to say. So when I break it down into its details and I'm busy speaking, I myself shock myself with things that I didn't plan on saying in the class. What are you talking about? I came in here with a plan. I was going to just give it over to you. This is klal and prat, as simple as it gets. And while I'm busy saying my own pratim, I realize things from my own speech that I never even planned to say before I even get to the student, right? That happens all the time. A guy will be up giving a speech. He literally went over it 10 times. He knows exactly word for word he's going to say. As soon as it comes out of his mouth, he has an instant chiddush up there and he throws in something that he wasn't even planning to say. Happens all the time. How? Because when you're working with the details, you climb up past the original prat and you find new things that you can then bring through that klal. Afilu achrei she'abina mislabeshes b'machshava, d'ma shechoshvu machshava achas hine b'dibur hu zman meshech zman. And he says, even after the chokhmah goes into a bina, which is already a breakdown of parts, and even after the bina goes into thought, which is already more of a breakdown of parts, when it gets finally into speech, which is the ultimate breakdown of parts, that's when you find so much more of the details emerging out of nowhere. The shoresh hadibur hu l'mayla yoser mishoresh the bina, because just like bina has a higher source than chokhmah, speech, malchus, dibur, has a higher source than bina. In other words, the lower you go, the higher your source. It's kind of like a rubber band. You pull in both directions at the same time, right? If you're going to pull it all the way down and get itself all the way to Or Kasdim, and you're going to put Avram in a pit, it's good. You're going to add a hey to his name. I don't know if this is like a whole other mimer I'm jumping into for a second, but the idea is that I will talk about it for a second. Avram, this is where this is first found in Torah Or, and it's a beautiful little board over there. It says Avram was his name to begin with. Avram, right? Which means what? Exalted Chokhmah. Ram is exalted. Av is father, which means Chokhmah. Yes? This was the name of our forefather. All of a sudden, it says, V'yomer el Avram lech lecha. Right? He tells Avram, which is this exalted Chokhmah, now just remove it from the characters, you're now talking about Sfiros, and he tells this Chokhmah, which in its exalted form, lech lecha, which means go down, right? Right? All the way down to to the land that I will show you. So he's basically bringing the Chokhmah all the way down. And then he says, what happens to it all of a sudden? He gets his name changed to Avraham. Right? What is Avraham? Avram is he adds a hey into his name, right? And this idea of adding a hey into his name is essentially the notion that he sort of grabbed onto this Indian of Bina, because instead of saying in this exalted point of Avraham, he's going to go down into the world of Pratim, he's going to start breaking out the points. But the idea is that in order to get to that hey, in order to go so low and bring the message so low, he really needed to be this rubber band. The lower he goes, the higher he accesses. And that's why this was the great first mitzvah of Hashem. This is the first commandment that was given to the first Jew. It's basically go down, and I will show you wondrous things, because by going down to the pratim, you're going to be enlightened with higher and higher and higher levels beyond the original Avram, beyond the exalted Chachma. The lower you go, the higher your source, and the more you're able to reveal. So this is the source of this idea. And he's saying the same thing is true when it comes to speech. That speech in its source is higher than Bina. Malchus gets lower than Bina, so it's ultimately rooted higher than Bina. That's why, by the way, you may have noticed, it's loud when Jews learn Torah together, right? You go into a library by the Goyim, sheket. There's a sign on the wall. Don't talk, right? You're disturbing my concentration. You go into a yeshiva, it's like you walked into Madison Square Garden in the middle of a concert. It's crazy. A proper yeshiva is kol Torah. Why? Because we have a mitzvah to learn Torah out loud with our mouth. And it actually says the louder and more intense you learn it, the more it gets like ingrained into your body. If you think all day the words of Torah, Mazel tov. I'm sure that was enlightening for you, but you did not fulfill the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. You have to say it with your mouth. Why? Isn't it wisdom? Taka, it is. But when you bring it down into speech, the wisdom strangely multiplies. It gets advanced wisdom because it goes lower and detailed into speech. And that's what we're commanded to do so. I mean, for amongst other reasons. So the idea is that when you learn with your mouth, you wind up understanding things and finding new information that wasn't even in your mind. What in the world is going on there? Your mouth suddenly produces ideas that you didn't have in your mind before. Gamba saga de bina. Even in the root of your meditations of bina, where you can sit there and meditate in perfect silence in a Goyish library, you suddenly speak it out and you're imbued with a new wisdom. Why? It doesn't make sense. And another example. First he gave an example from Chochmah to Bina, then he's giving an example from speech to Bina. Now he gives another example from a student to a teacher. Yes? That's not when you're learning Torah, obviously, right? It's like
You could respond to that.
right, exactly. That's when basically, let's say someone's going to come screaming at you and releasing all their emotions at you. What should you do? Right. So this is a different. Obviously silence is not a way to gain wisdom. It's a way to preserve your wisdom. It says a sayag l'chochma. It's a fence so you don't lose your wisdom. It doesn't say that it's a way to amplify your wisdom, right? Because if you start speaking out of anger and out of emotion, basically you're draining yourself into the klippas.
In some cases, though, like where you speak at low volume, you kind of draw people in. You know what I mean?
That's not silence.
Right. Exactly.
It's dedicated speech. It's crafty and skilled speech.
Yeah.
Look at you go to any public speaker. I'm a musician also, so it's called dynamics. If you just play loud the whole time, everyone just kind of loses it. It's too much. But if you all of a sudden quiet it down, get the groove going, you draw everybody in, and then you get loud. You know, it's not that. It's dynamics. It's basically the way you speak is with waves and highs and lows. Okay, so he says this same thing is true when it comes to Rav and Talmud, student and teacher. When you break down the idea into many details, particularly when you break it down to a young student or a fresh student who doesn't know his way around so much, right? This, by the way, Rabbi Gafni is about to come daven with us. He famously was the one who had this Yechidus with the Rabbi, who told him that the Baal Tshuva Yeshiva was like the cherry on top of the whole Lubavitch. I was talking to someone last night trying to convince him to come to yeshiva. He's like, I don't know. I want to go to a yeshiva where whatever he had in mind. I didn't hear the rest of that because it's just. But I said, you don't understand. Like the Baal Tshuva Yeshiva, what's so great about it? Because dafka, when you have someone who doesn't know all the klalim, and you have to break it down prat after prat after prat after prat. This is the place where all the wisdom comes out. It's the cherry on top of the whole Lubavitch. Because this is how Torah is intended to be. You need a dira b'tachtonim. You don't have a tachtonim, you don't have a dira, right? So this is where the action happens. The kol mashashpa hi letalmid katan yoser. The more you get, the more the receiver is lower and younger and less experienced. That means you have to detail it down and say it again and repeat the class every day. Another introduction, you have to go over and over the same concept. You have to change them and give new examples. If everyone knows the mimer and they can read through it, you never get to that place. It's like an arena. You're looking for a student that doesn't know anything. Not that that's you guys, chas v'chalila. I'm saying when you're going to go teach children, you want to teach your own children. The best thing you can do for yourself, your own understanding, is to dumb yourself down into trying to explain yourself to a rock. This way, all the details, this is what Hashem did, right? Hashem wasn't satisfied with the infinite light. He wasn't satisfied with klal and prat and atzilus and yetzirah. He said, give me a rock I can explain the Torah to. That will get me my essence to come out. That's what he did. He put the Torah on a rock. In a rock. 2 rocks. Take 2. Right? Hine al yedei ze misvasev etzel harav omek chadash shelo haya etzlo lifnei hashpa. And when he details it, it adds to the Rav. Just like I said by Avram Avinu, the lower he went, the higher wisdom he was able to achieve. And it's the same is true with Hashem, that the deeper he's able to go into his own mind. Kamaimer. And that's what it's, the sages said everything very succinctly. Mi talmida yosu mikulam. So I learned a lot from my rabbis, even more from my friends, and from my students, I learned the most. On the outset, that doesn't even make sense. How are you going to learn from your students? You're teaching them. But now taka makes sense. When you teach them, you literally learn the most because you were busy thinking about the idea on your own. Worlds of chidushim did not come to you. You learn the most from your students. Not necessarily that they're teaching you, but by teaching them, you become the wisest. That's why it says, Dilmodul lamed. It's not sufficient to learn. You have to learn and teach. Right? You even go down into deed. Hashem even says, you know what, my wisdom is so deep, I don't even want you to think about it anymore. I want you to wrap it on your arm. It's crazy how much lower. It's like literally putting wisdom into a rock. How is that wise? Right? I can wrap chewing gum on my arm. No, it's like, this is my wisdom. It goes into your arm. You wrap it in leather. Because honestly, to bring it so low, it unleashes the infinite levels of wisdom. And this is true that the teacher learns most from his student, not from a good student, right? It's the famous story, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, that basically they were at each other's throat. Reish Lakish was the student Rabbi Yochanan, and they argued to the point that Rabbi Yochanan got so angry with him, he basically gave him like an ayin hara and killed him. He was so upset. Because it was me and Ras, nothing, right? We get along. It was an intense battle of Torah, right? And so afterwards, they tried to appease Rabbi Yochanan. They brought him another student, but he was like a yes man. And everything that Rabbi Yochanan said, he was like, yeah, I totally get it. I understand. It makes sense. And he basically himself died of depression because he's like, no, that's not. I'm not learning anything from this student. So it's not only when you teach to a student. It's when the student doesn't understand and bothers you and starts to ask questions. And that's when you have to go climbing deep into answering questions that you didn't even feign to imagine that someone could even ask such a question. But the problem is, now that you asked it, I have to give you an answer. In order to answer and remove this difficulty, you find new deep depths. So again, in the details, you reach higher than the original source.
Didn't Rabbi used to say something about children's questions? Or sometimes the most
Yeah, the Rabbi sort of made a whole career on this idea of the klutz kasha. Questions that are so obvious that you're like, Rabbi, but how did a man not eat and drink for 40 days? You wouldn't ask it. It's just part of the story. But he's like, but if your child's going to stand up and ask it, now you got to give him an answer. Right? So it's all the Rebbe Sichos are based on questions like this. Just the obvious questions that you didn't even think was you were allowed to ask. Here's the Rebbe of the whole world asking this question and then giving you an answer. That's most of the Sichos come from something like this. What's that?
What's the name of that?
Klutz. Okay.
We'll
hold here. Right. Okay. Shukayach.
Amazing.
Shukayach.